The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. The Investment Fix podcast. Tune in today.
The Fold is brought to you by oMedia, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. No mai hoki mai kia The Fold. E mihi ne ko Duncan tōku ngoa. My guest today is Nick Weil, who's the GM of oMedia. That's O with two O's, and it stands for Out of Home Media. With a lot of the time when I talk about media on here, you may or may not have engaged with it. There is zero chance that you haven't seen oMedia's work. Most days you'll probably engage with it, and yet you probably haven't thought about it, and I certainly hadn't nearly enough. And I think that's kind of why I think that this is a pretty interesting conversation, because you've got on the one hand a form of media that has literally very close to, if not 100% penetration, and almost no sense of what it is in the public consciousness. And yeah, that's because on some level, people like me and media consumers are much more interested in the news, entertainment, social media space rather than, what is, fundamentally a pure advertising format like out of home. When I say out of home, we're talking about large format billboards, or in terms of what O specialise in, it's the kind of bus shelter and more kind of street furniture type space. And I think that, over the last 20 years or so, the story of media overall has been of legacy media forms, television, radio, magazines, print, etc., sort of shrinking and grappling with the fact that the advertising market has swung so hard towards digital and particularly towards the sort of almost utility type digital, the likes of Google and Facebook. And yet there's one form which is, extremely analog in some respects, in that it exists only in the real world, and that's out of home. And it's actually grown quite significantly as a share of market, which I think is quite an interesting phenomenon to talk about. So with Nick, we get into what has driven that kind of paradoxical growth, which is very much against the grain of any other really New Zealand domiciled media company. And I should say that Nick and oMedia have very generously agreed to come on as headline sponsors of The Fold over the next few months. So this is part of that package. But honestly, this is as interesting as any episode of The Fold, and I was really excited to talk to Nick. I've met him before, and he's a very interesting guy. Had a long career in media prior to starting at O as well. And yeah, so this discussion basically gets into the kind of the history of out of home, why it has grown against the grain, how the digital revolution has impacted it, both in terms of the means of delivery and how it's displayed, and the way I think that there remains an opportunity to use this medium in a more creative way. I speak about this on the pod. There was a realization that the television commercial could also be art, and that was a big sort of theme of the 90s and 2000s. And I think that there really probably needs to be a bit of a sense of just how creative you can be with the out-of-home medium, given the immediacy and use of data and kind of response to events. So this is Nick Weil, the GM of oMedia, talking about the out-of-home story, essentially, on The Fold. Tēnā koe, Nick, and welcome to The Fold.
Yeah, kia ora, Duncan. Good to see you, and thanks for having me here up in this beautiful space. Unfortunately, on a rainy Friday.
It's a pretty abysmal day for sure, but I'm very grateful to have you up, and also for sponsoring the Fold for the next few months. So, I wonder if you could start by just telling me about your path to the out of home genre.
Well, that's a very good question. I've been working in out of home for close to 15 years now, which is hard to imagine. But my father, when I was growing up, always said to me that if you find a job that you enjoy, then it's a job for life. So I took that advice. I actually started in the wine industry when I left university. So I completed a BCom in marketing, and then went to Lincoln and did a postgrad in viticulture. And from there, had 4 great years at Montana Wines. Part of my role there in the last year was actually managing a relationship we had with the New Zealand Rugby Union. And through that relationship, I was offered an opportunity to go and work at NZ Rugby. And as a true blue Kiwi bloke, it was a hard call to make between wine and rugby. But I thought, well, if I'm never going to be an All Black, it's as close as I'm ever going to get. So I took that opportunity and had 3 years at the Rugby Union. And from that, I was managing a relationship with TV3 at the time. And I was kind of shoehorned into a role at TV3 as head of sports sales. So the incumbent had become a good friend, and he decided to go off and follow his own vision for setting up a new business. And so fortunately I was able to follow his slipstream into TV3 and was responsible for the commercialisation of all of our sport products at that time. And it was significant. So we were the free-to-air broadcaster for All Blacks, for Super Rugby. We carried World Rally, the Warriors, cricket. Like, there was a big portfolio of sports. So I was kind of in my happy place where not only was I able to be heavily involved with sport, but also in the media industry, lots of time spent out lunching, and so that was a combination of my passion for sport and for wine. And as Sky actually became stronger, we the importance of sport on free-to-air unfortunately was diminished as Sky's penetration into households grew, and that the audience on free-to-air declined. So I moved into a sales management role, and really enjoyed the diversity of media sales. But then saw that out of home at that time was really sort of under indexing in terms of its place in other countries. So I, for whatever reason, saw that as an opportunity. Didn't know exactly what the opportunity was, but took the plunge and got into out of home, as I said, 15 years ago. So initially with a startup called OG Digital. So we deployed a whole lot of digital screens through the warehouse at that stage. Launched right in the midst of the GFC, which was not great timing in terms of trying to monetize that product. And then after 2 years, flogging digital screens through the warehouse group, my wife said to me it was time to get a real job and a proper salary. And AdShell came along at that time. So been with AdShell and then O Media since then.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that that outdoor or out of home media sort of felt under indexed in New Zealand, because as a sort of a fairly passive observer of it, it has felt like something which was not a huge part of the kind of visual culture of the country, and has risen quite rapidly over the past probably 10, 15 years. And to the point where, and that is during a period when a lot of the other legacy media has kind of shrunk, or it's the sort of share of attention and energy associated with it has come away. So it's quite strange to have a non-internet story that's actually risen through that time. Is that accurate in terms of where it is proportionally in terms of spend and its general penetration in the country?
Yeah, you're pretty much spot on there. I think over that time, if you go, I actually went back and researched some numbers before coming along here today. So the furthest I could go back was 2012, and at that time, out of home represented just 3% of the total media market, which was around sort of circa 60 million. We've certainly grown in that 15 years, and the role of out of home has evolved significantly. It's an interesting medium because we do exist within the community, but unless you make a specific, inquiry around what it is, then it does sort of just exist there, but in people's lives. And as we've seen, traditional media decline, and the fragmentation of media, and that dialogue that everybody talks about and knows about. The one constant in everyone's lives is that they do spend time out of home. They do commute, they do go and watch their kids play sport, they go to the movies, they go out for dinner. So when they're not looking at their iPad or their phone, when they're not, when they're in the out of home environment, then that's the opportunity to capture people's attention. And the role of out of home has really evolved from, being a quirky idea that, and there's been some great campaigns over the years. You think about the TUI campaign as one that everyone goes, well, that was just a fantastic execution of out of home, because it took it from just beyond a billboard to actually creating a dialogue around it, and that's really the opportunity. But with the advent of technology and digitalisation and all those sorts of things, we've really see it play a much more diverse role in terms of the way that advertisers are using it as part of their media mix.
I mean, I wanted to talk about that because obviously, it's grown as a proportion of overall share, and to what extent that's driven by an increase in the sort of overall number of sites. I'd like to talk about how a site comes to be and what the kind of constraints or opportunities are there, but also about, that digital piece is really, really interesting in terms of, like technology enabling a much faster turnover of sites, and ultimately that a campaign can be distributed far more quickly and widely than it might otherwise during this sort of static billboard era. So what do you sort of put that down to, of those two forces, or is there any that I'm missing?
It's probably a combination of the both. I think digitisation has definitely enabled advertisers to use the medium in ways that they've never been able to. And you think about the old way of buying out of home was you'd buy a location, and effectively it was a tenancy. And I always use the example of Coca-Cola, and then subsequently Hyundai on the Orams building as you're coming over the Harbour Bridge. Over the Harbour Bridge. And they would own it for years, which was great at the time. And so out of home sort of transitioning from a position where people would buy a specific location to actually focusing on the audience that they're reaching, regardless of the location. And so digitisation has enabled that, but it's enabled advertisers to be much more flexible with the creative content. So, using weather triggers on days like today, you wouldn't want to be selling ice creams, but you might be wanting to sell umbrellas or raincoats, or so you can change the messaging dependent on the weather, dependent on your product sell through, dependent on the time of the day, and with the advent of programmatic, you can actually change your messaging within minutes. But all automated and all related to whatever the many different triggers are that are relevant to your brand or to your service or to your product. So digitisation has played a huge role. And in the early days when we started to see digital billboards, or in our situation, digital advertising within the bus shelter environment, it was about ease of deployment of the copy. It's gone from the old days where the lead times were significant for out of home, so which was a barrier for many advertisers, because you're looking at sort of many weeks, if not months, to plan your out of home campaign. But These days, as I said, you can have copy ready and up on the screens within minutes. So that's the sort of the actual screen itself and how it can be used. But then the other component that's really driving things is the use of data and how people can use the out-of-home spend more effectively by targeting, be more effective with the way that they're targeting the relevant audience for their product or service. And that's been a huge development over the last 3 to 4 years.
Are there some examples of both the kinds of data that your sites can generate and of campaigns that have made really intelligent use of that data?
There's a few, or there's quite a lot, but a really good one would be the Electoral Commission, the last election. That they were really wanting to avoid a situation where people, being people, leave the voting decision right to the very last minute and would go and find a polling booth late in the piece. So that they're wanting to sort of spread the load, basically. So they ran a campaign with us nationwide that targeted our ad panels that were in very close proximity to polling booths and advising not only that, hey, there's a location nearby, but at the moment the queue is this, or it's like when you're driving down the motorway now and you see, well, State Highway 16 to Albany is 25 minutes versus State Highway 1 is 35 minutes. So, that was a really good example of sort of integrating the data that they were collecting around, the pressure that was they were experiencing at the polling booths, and then, encouraging people to get in ahead of time.
And that kind of points to something like, which is really interesting to me about this idea of, outdoor or out-of-home media as a almost like the last bastion of the kind of monoculture. Like everyone sees the same thing if they're in the same place. And that's changed in the algorithmic sorting era, and the era of consumers selecting their own media. Do you think that, over time, and certainly as there is that more sort of dynamic or creative usage of them, there was obviously the period where we started to recognise that the television commercial could be an art form unto itself, and now is this kind of last thing that everyone sees. Do you think that there is developing, or there is an argument to be made for, and certainly like the TUI billboard would speak to that, with of them as an art form unto themselves, and that there is something important about there being at least one media form that we're all looking at, rather than the way that everything else is kind of, who can ever tell what's on an individual screen?
Yeah. We talk about sort of mood of the nation, and that point that it really is the last medium that you can reach a mass audience at scale. You can reach them quickly, you can reach them cost effectively, and from a creative perspective, really understanding the mood of the nation and using that flexibility and that capability to craft your creatives so that you're really tapping into the emotions and the mood and the Christchurch. Unfortunately, the tragedy in Christchurch, a few years ago, was a situation where we reacted quickly and we turned off all of our ad panels in Christchurch. And then that weekend we ran just no advertising for the whole weekend across our whole network nationally, and just ran a simple Love Heart New Zealand flag, and changed it out between black and white so that it was grabbing people's attention. But it's that sort of thing that the creative community really needs to take on board in terms of the way that they're utilising the medium, because there, as you say, there is an opportunity to reach that mass audience, or to reach your target audience at scale, but really tap into the mood of the nation at the time, and react to the way that people are experiencing your brand or your service. There's definitely that opportunity, and we like to think that we can play many roles in terms of the media mix and that how we support TV and digital spend. But in some situations, there is opportunities to use us, exclusively as a way to reach that mass audience.
It seems to me that, again, speaking to that kind of monoculture element, that, that there, because this is a relatively recent development, the digitisation and the ability to reservice within, a very short period of time, that there is, I don't think we've begun to kind of scratch the surface of how that could be used. One of the things, we've had two campaigns over the last year for the spin-off, both of which have extensively used out of home, which have tried to kind of basically utilise it as a way of effectively being the top of a sphere of telling a story. And, we, because of the nature of the way those things were structured, there wasn't the same kind of immediacy as you would with the website, for example. But you can imagine a world where the out-of-home environment could have responded to a news event like Ardern's resignation with a kind of a media proposition that sort of creatively spoke to that and ultimately drove attention to brands like ours. Do you see that kind of work coming out of the creative community, or do you think there is? It's almost like are creative agencies the best, given the pace at which they work, the best place to respond to it? Or are there other examples of people taking the billboards and utilising some of that sort of new dynamic environment in ways that might, feel like they're pointing to the future of where this all might go?
Yeah, I think because the role that out of home has played, and a position within the broader media mix, the right amount of attention on creative execution hasn't been focused on the media. And there's lots of examples where people have just taken newspaper ads or magazine ads or whatever and put that up on a billboard and thought, well, that's doing the job.
You see that quite frequently, and it just looks wrong. It seems so careless.
And I think now that we're playing a more important role, so if you look at all the data through the media agencies, then out of home is now the number 3 media within that mix behind digital and TV. So as the importance of out of home grows, then and I was talking to an ex-CMO yesterday who was discussing this exact point. Why don't people use the medium correctly? And the point we got to in that discussion, well, now that it's becoming more and more important and more on the radar of the CMOs and the marketers, then they will actually demand better creative execution. It's in saying that there's lots of brands out there that are using it effectively and using it the right way. And some of the QSRs are very good at targeting, time of day in terms of their menu offering, adjusting, the product offering in terms of the weather, and all those sorts of things. But, and sort of back to that concept of mood of the nation, I think there is definitely an opportunity for people to step up and go, right, here's a way that as a brand we're going to react, and we're going to react in the out-of-home environment. We had an interesting conversation with a young tech startup business earlier this week. You talk to them about how they consume media, that one of the guys' perspective was, look, I don't actually really, the first media I see every day is a billboard. So that talks to the opportunity and the potential power of the medium.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
I know that when we spoke earlier, you talked about the importance of and the increasing role that mana whenua play in the sort of out-of-home environment. Do you want to sort of speak to that? Because I think it's not something that kind of naturally springs to mind, potentially.
For us and for our particular format, so we've got a lot of assets out in the public space and on public land. For us, it's about thinking about honouring the original owners of the land, or those that have owned the land at some point in time, and really trying to understand what is iwi's agenda and how can we potentially support that and play a role in their own program. And so last year we really went on a journey. So before we engaged with these iwi, we really wanted to educate ourselves. Our leadership team participated in a tikanga course. We spent a lot of time with a guy called Dr. Jim Mather, who runs a really great Māori governance course through the Institute of Directors, and recommend that anyone out there should, if they haven't, then engage him and his team to do that course. And it gave us a real awareness of, what Māori governance is all about, and it can be quite intimidating from the outside looking in, and sort of really understanding, well, where do we go? How do we start? What does it mean? Are we being authentic in the way that we're bringing this to life? And that's certainly our approach. We don't want to just be ticking boxes, which is, why we went through that education process. And when you come out the back end of those courses and whatnot, it's really just about taking that first step. And as I said, it can be intimidating, but it's not how you do it. It's or what you're doing. It's just the fact that you're actually starting that journey. Sort of a bit like dancing, really. It's you're good or you're bad. It doesn't matter. It's the fact that you're on the dance floor that counts. And so for us, it's the key learnings are around the Māori economy and governance and all those sorts of things is. It's really relationship based. So you've got to start a relationship and you've got to build that relationship so that you've got a deep understanding of each party's motivations and desired outcomes and ways of thinking, and so that you can really build an approach that is going to be mutually beneficial. You look at the treaty and the concepts of participation, and it's all about that, and building. Having a long-term view and leaving the world, your situation, your business, your role in a better place than when you found it. So they're the sort of key principles that we are looking to adopt. And as we go through, a tender process and start to roll out new bus shelter infrastructure, it's, well, how can we use this to help bring the iwi program to life, whether it's recognition at that specific location, or whether it's a broader design piece, or whether it's actually just our approach to the environment, and are we using materials that are good for the environment? Are our cleaning practices good for the environment? And back to the relationship piece, what's our relationship with the planet, and what's our, and how are we respecting that for the long-term good of everyone?
So out of home is a medium unto itself, but it is unavoidably also part of a broader media environment, one in which there's a lot of prediction that this next year or so is going to be a pretty challenging one. You saw MediaWorks, which is also in the out-of-home business, announcing 90 job losses earlier this week. What are the signals you're seeing out of the that commercial environment at the moment, and are you sort of in that same, not necessarily in the same boat in terms of layoffs, but in the same boat in terms of predicting that it is going to be a pretty hard environment with these sort of inflation and interest rate pressures that are out there at the moment?
Well, I'm a forever optimist. So last year we thought it was going to be a fantastic year, the first year without any major impact of COVID, and look what happened. This year everyone's talking doom and gloom, so hopefully the opposite happens this year. But I think there's no denying that there'll be the impact of the inflationary pressures, particularly the interest rates, as everyone's supposedly coming off low interest and onto the higher interest rates. So that's going to affect consumer spending and whatnot. And look, I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to wax lyrical about what's going to happen in the economy. But we've been through recessionary times. We've been through the last 2 years of having to have a huge amount of resilience. That first lockdown in 2020 was, sudden and catastrophic for out of home, because pretty hard to sell a media space that's out of home when the government's just mandated that everyone stays inside. So, we've learnt a lot over the last 2 years, and those learnings will definitely bring through to what we think is going to be a reasonably lumpy year, although our forward bookings going into this year are actually contradictory to that economic environment. So our forward book is actually at this stage, pacing reasonably well despite what everybody's saying. And I think there's two types of advertisers in a recession: those that pull their advertising spend as they try to focus on cost reduction, and then there's those that really use it as an opportunity to take share of voice and put themselves in a really strong position to bounce back quickly post-recession. And given the cost-effective and broadcast reach of out-of-home, in recessionary times it can hold up reasonably well. So, no doubt we're in for challenging times, but hey, we've had a challenging 2 or 3 years, so that's no different. And we'll just have the team focused on the way that we can support advertisers through the recession.
Just before we go, there's one event later in the year which has potential to impact your business. Do you get a lot of spend from political parties as you head into an election? What's the relationship like there?
Not necessarily from political parties themselves, but generally going into an election, the government is very active in terms of their own spending. So we're expecting to see a bit of an uptick in terms of government agencies advertising their services throughout the course of this year.
That's interesting. So do you have a sort of a theory of why that is, that they're in anticipation of an election, wanting to make sure that both the public and politicians are very aware of the good works that they do? What's the idea there, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's partly that, but also, they've got a budget to spend, so why not spend it? But, the whole media industry has really benefited from the Ministry of Health through the COVID times, that they were... I think they did a fantastic job of, every day, 1:00, there was an announcement, and then the media agency went into hyperdrive around, okay, what are our comms for the next 24 hours? So we've all benefited from that, and, back to the benefits of digital and out of home, they're able to utilise that to change their messaging every day. So we're certainly not going to see that same level of spend from the government this year going into the election, but there's definitely a bit of an uptick as those government agencies fire up in an election year.
All right, Nick, thank you so much for coming up. And really, really fascinating learning about the dynamics of the out-of-home industry. And look forward to chatting again later in the year.
No problems at all. And thanks for having me.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Talofa lover, I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.